For centuries, humanity has looked at the moon as a silent companion, an eternal sentinel that has watched over Earth since long before the first cities were built or the first words were written. It was always there, unchanging, cold, and mute. But what if that silence was never real? What if the moon wasn't quiet at all, but simply waiting, dormant, until the right voice called to it? That is the terrifying possibility that astronomers now face. Over the last months, the interstellar object 3I Atlas has captivated scientists with its emerald glow, its inexplicable trajectory changes, and its strange pulses of energy. Many thought the mystery was confined to the object itself. But then, something happened that no one could have predicted. Atlas sent a pulse directly to the moon, and minutes later, the moon answered. Instruments all across the world lit up with signals that should not have existed, echoes that bore patterns far too precise to dismiss as random. For the first time in history, it seemed our lunar guardian was no longer silent. It had joined the conversation. The first evidence came from ground-based antennas in Australia and Spain, part of the Deep Space Network. These observatories are built to monitor spacecraft across the solar system, but what they detected was far stranger. A sharp, clean burst of energy arrived, not diffuse like the noise of a solar flare or the hiss of cosmic rays, but laser-like, targeted, and timed. When researchers triangulated the source, the result was chilling. The signal had come directly from 3I Atlas. Within minutes of that pulse striking the moon, satellites orbiting our nearest neighbor began reporting anomalies. Radio emissions, inexplicable and new, started bouncing from regions of the lunar surface that had been completely silent for decades. Some signals even originated from the dark side of the moon, places untouched by human technology. The moon, long thought to be a dead rock, had just responded with a voice of its own. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't a reflection. It was something else entirely, an answer. Scientists who first saw the data described a feeling that the air had left the room, as though they were witnessing not an event of astronomy, but of contact. When the data was analyzed more deeply, it revealed something even more unsettling. The returning signal from the moon didn't simply mirror Atlas's pulse, it carried entirely new layers of information. Within its harmonics were sequences of prime numbers, spirals, and golden ratios identical to those embedded in Atlas's glow. But there were also distortions, delays that suggested the signal had passed through dense material before re-emerging. Lunar seismographs, still maintained on the surface since the Apollo missions, recorded faint tremors in the crust, subtle vibrations perfectly synchronized with the pulse. To many, it was as though Atlas had knocked on the moon and something inside had stirred awake to answer. Some proposed it was a natural resonance, a kind of ringing caused by the object's energy. But others whispered a more haunting idea. The moon was not just responding passively. It was transmitting actively, as if something dormant beneath its surface had received the call and replied. This was no longer about rocks or craters. This was about the possibility that our closest celestial neighbor contained secrets older than Earth itself, and that Atlas had the key to unlock them. The implications of the lunar reply shook the scientific world, but they also gave new life to ideas once ridiculed. For decades, a handful of researchers and fringe theorists had suggested that the moon might not be entirely natural. The hollow moon hypothesis, born from seismic readings during the Apollo era, claimed that when modules crashed onto the surface, the moon rang like a bell, vibrating far longer than expected. Mainstream science dismissed it as unusual geology, but nothing more. Until now. The structured response to Atlas's signal forced even the most skeptical minds to reconsider. Was the moon more than just a rock? Could it harbor vast hollow chambers, or even dormant structures designed to awaken only under the right conditions? Old documents resurfaced, ancient myths of the moon being placed in the sky, legends of a second sun transformed into our satellite. Suddenly, these were no longer dismissed as poetic stories, but possible cultural memories of an event humanity had long forgotten. The moon's reply wasn't just noise, it was a voice from the past, one that seemed to confirm that we were never alone, not even in our own sky. If Atlas had sent a signal to the moon, and the moon had replied, Then the question became terrifyingly simple. What happens next? Was this a one-time exchange, or the beginning of an ongoing dialogue? Astronomers watched in disbelief as subsequent pulses from Atlas were followed by corresponding emissions from the lunar surface, as though the two were engaged in a conversation across space. More chilling still, the signals didn't appear random. Analysts reported geometric maps forming within the harmonics, alignments pointing toward Earth itself. Was the moon now acting as a relay, carrying Atlas's message into our world? Or had it been waiting silently for this moment, its systems dormant until a signal from deep space woke them again? The implications were staggering. For decades, humanity looked at the moon as a passive body. Now it seemed to be an instrument, a participant in a dialogue that bypassed us entirely. And as Atlas drew closer, the fear deepened. If the moon could answer, then what exactly was it answering on behalf of, and why had it chosen now to break its silence? As news of the moon's reply began to spread, scholars from outside the field of astronomy were drawn into the debate. Archaeologists, historians, and linguists began examining the data with a sense of déjà vu. The spirals, ratios, and geometric harmonics embedded in the lunar signals echoed designs that had been etched into human culture for thousands of years. From the intricate spirals carved into Irish megaliths at Newgrange to the lunar calendars of the Maya and the stone discs of Mesopotamia, the same motifs appeared again and again, as though ancient civilizations had witnessed this exchange long before telescopes could record it. Some suggested that humanity might have lived through this cycle before, that Atlas had returned at intervals across millennia, always speaking first to the moon and leaving impressions strong enough to shape myth, architecture, and even religion. Suddenly, the line between legend and science blurred. What if the moon wasn't just answering now, but had always been a messenger, carrying voices across eons and recording them in the memory of human stone? While scholars debated the past, engineers and scientists focused on the present, and what they found was even more chilling. Earth-based satellites in lunar orbit, some dormant for years, began emitting bursts of data that matched the rhythm of Atlas's pulses. Decommissioned probes, long silent, suddenly woke as if commanded, transmitting strings of binary noise that, when decoded, aligned with the same prime number sequences found in the moon's response. Even Earth-bound radio telescopes recorded faint echoes in frequencies they weren't actively tuned to, as if every machine designed to listen to the cosmos had been drafted into service. Atlas's influence wasn't limited to celestial bodies. It seemed to be co-opting human technology as part of its dialogue. For the first time, the line between our instruments and their signal blurred, leaving scientists wondering if we were still observers or if we had unwillingly become participants in a conversation we didn't understand. As the moon continued to respond, Earth began to show signs of being drawn into the exchange. Seismic monitors recorded faint tremors not caused by tectonic activity, but by vibrations pulsing through the ground in synchronization with Atlas and the moon. Compasses in remote research stations spun wildly at precise intervals, and auroras began to appear in skies far from the poles, glowing with an emerald hue that mirrored the object's light. Farmers in rural areas reported unusual behavior in animals, flocks of birds gathering in geometric formations under the night sky, while coastal towns described tides that rose and fell slightly off rhythm with the moon's gravity, as though another hand had taken control. For the first time, it appeared Earth was no longer just a spectator. The moon might have answered, but now our planet itself seemed to be joining the dialogue, vibrating in resonance with forces older and far larger than we could comprehend. Then came the most disturbing phase of all. After a sequence of intense exchanges between Atlas and the moon, the signals abruptly stopped. Telescopes across the world detected nothing. No pulses, no echoes, no anomalies. For nearly 6 hours, the cosmos went quiet. At first, scientists breathed a sigh of relief, believing perhaps the phenomenon had ended. But the calm was an illusion. When the data was replayed and analyzed at ultra-low frequencies, it revealed that the silence wasn't silence at all. Hidden beneath the noise floor was a continuous hum, faint but deliberate, stretching across Earth, Moon, and Atlas simultaneously. It was as though the three bodies had been locked into a quiet frequency beyond human hearing, communicating in whispers while humanity thought the sky had gone still. That realization chilled even the most skeptical voices, because if they had lowered their volume, it meant they were hiding something. Not from each other, but from us. While radio astronomers focused on decoding the transmissions, optical telescopes uncovered an anomaly of their own. During the moments when Atlas pulsed toward the moon, its emerald glow brightened and split into faint beams, refracting in directions that didn't match the physics of a comet or asteroid. When the beams were analyzed, they contained modulated variations that perfectly matched the frequencies recorded in the lunar echoes. In other words, Atlas wasn't just transmitting through radio waves, it was embedding a second layer of its message in visible light. Even more astonishing was the discovery that the moon's surface reflected this light differently than expected, scattering faint green arcs that could be seen stretching into the void. For a few fleeting minutes, the Earth-Moon system looked less like a natural orbit and more like a signal tower, transmitting across the cosmos. Humanity wasn't just listening anymore, it was glowing with Atlas. As the phenomenon grew harder to deny, old archival records resurfaced. Hidden within decades of forgotten data, researchers unearthed strange anomalies in lunar monitoring stations dating back to the Cold War. In 1971, Soviet radio telescopes had logged unexplained bursts from the moon, dismissed at the time as interference. Apollo-era seismographs recorded mysterious vibrations, noted but never explained. Even ancient Chinese records described the moon ringing like a drum during eclipses. At the time, these accounts were ridiculed or ignored. Now they took on a terrifying new context. Had Atlas communicated with the moon before? Had every previous close approach triggered the same awakening, with humanity too primitive to understand what it was seeing? The idea spread rapidly. This wasn't the first conversation. This was simply the first one we had the technology to overhear. Then came the night the entire world noticed. Without warning, the moon began to emit a faint green glow of its own, independent of sunlight. Amateur astronomers from every continent documented the same eerie phenomenon, the lunar surface pulsing faintly in rhythm with Atlas, like a heartbeat visible against the black of space. Entire cities watched the moon change color, casting a subtle emerald tint across oceans and landscapes. Governments scrambled to dismiss it as an atmospheric trick, but the footage was undeniable. The moon had become more than a passive reflector. It was a beacon, transmitting a message not just in radio, not just in vibrations, but in visible light that the whole world could see. Humanity no longer needed instruments to know the truth. The moon was no longer silent. What came next pushed the phenomenon beyond anything imagined. Astronomers noticed that during Atlas's closest approach to the sun, its pulses lined up perfectly with the moon's orbit. Every 27.3 days, when the moon completed its cycle, the timing of the signals adjusted as if compensating, locking the two into a synchronized rhythm. When projected onto star maps, the alignment pointed toward specific constellations, Orion, Pleiades, and Cassiopeia, echoing the same maps buried within the lunar echoes. The conclusion was unavoidable. Atlas wasn't communicating randomly. It had linked itself to the moon deliberately, and together they were sending coordinates to something far beyond Earth. Humanity was no longer simply an audience to this conversation. It was caught in the middle of a cosmic alignment, one that hinted at a purpose larger than anyone was ready to face. In the days following the moon's eerie glow, scientists began to notice something even more troubling. Their own instruments were no longer behaving as expected. Radio telescopes that had once captured clean, predictable data now returned waveforms overlaid with repeating spirals, symbols no one had programmed into them. Spectrographs miscalibrated themselves in perfect unison, shifting toward the same narrow bands of green light associated with Atlas. Even devices disconnected from power grids showed inexplicable flickers, as though they were resonating with the lunar pulses. It became clear that observation was no longer passive. By watching the exchange between Atlas and the moon, our instruments had been drafted into it. The tools designed to study the universe were now speaking in a voice that wasn't ours, as though Atlas had extended its reach not only into the heavens, but into the very act of human perception itself. As researchers combed through the so-called silent gaps between the pulses, they uncovered something chilling. The silence wasn't empty. It carried faint whispers of ultra-low frequency oscillations, subtle enough to evade detection without advanced filtering. When layered and amplified, the oscillations formed a rhythm eerily similar to human speech patterns. Not words, not languages we knew, but cadences, pauses, emphases, and inflections that mimicked conversation. Linguists brought in to analyze the data reported that the patterns bore the hallmarks of dialogue, not monologue. Atlas spoke, the moon answered, and something within the silence responded in turn, as if a third participant had joined the exchange. But where was this third voice coming from? Was it Earth itself, resonating with the magnetic echoes, or something else entirely, hidden between the lines of a conversation we weren't supposed to hear? Soon, ordinary people began reporting phenomena too widespread to ignore. Night skies shimmered with faint emerald veils in regions where auroras had never been seen before, above the Sahara, over the Amazon, across the Mediterranean. Pilots described instruments going haywire mid-flight, needles spinning wildly as green arcs danced across their windshields. On the ground, metallic objects vibrated softly at regular intervals, kitchen appliances humming in sync with Atlas's pulses. Some individuals even reported hearing a low, resonant hum with their own ears, a sound without source that left them disoriented and breathless. The planet itself seemed to have developed a heartbeat, beating to a rhythm dictated not by nature, but by a visitor from the stars. Humanity no longer needed telescopes or data to feel Atlas's presence. It had crossed the line into daily life, painting the skies and shaking the ground in a way no one could escape. As the phenomenon reached its peak, a group of astronomers analyzing high-resolution lunar imagery noticed something extraordinary. During the pulses, shadows on the lunar surface shifted in ways that defied the geometry of sunlight. Craters elongated unnaturally, ridges bent into spirals, and vast plains seemed to darken in synchrony with Atlas's glow. When these distortions were mapped frame by frame, they formed coherent symbols, patterns identical to those found in ancient carvings across Earth. Spirals, concentric circles, and star maps etched themselves temporarily into the moon's face, as if revealing a hidden layer visible only under Atlas's command. The implication was staggering. The moon itself had become a screen, a living canvas for a message aimed at Earth. For the first time, the symbols weren't just buried in harmonics or frequencies. They were written in plain sight, across the face of the body we have stared at for millennia. And that begged the question, if the moon was now a messenger, then who was the intended recipient? Us or something else entirely? Seismometers left behind by Apollo missions and modern instruments aboard lunar orbiters began registering unusual tremors that couldn't be explained by meteor impacts or tectonic shifts. These vibrations weren't random. They pulsed with the same precise rhythm as Atlas's signals. More alarming still, the origin of these tremors wasn't shallow. They came from deep within the moon, far beneath the crust, in regions scientists believed to be solid and inactive. When modeled, the vibrations suggested hollow chambers or vast cavities resonating like the body of a drum. To some researchers, this was confirmation of a long-dismissed theory, that the moon was not a fully natural body, but a construct, or at least a modified object, capable of storing and transmitting information. If that was true, then Atlas's signal hadn't just awakened an echo. It had stirred something that had been waiting beneath the lunar surface for untold ages. Just as investigators began to settle on the idea of a two-way exchange between Atlas and the moon, a new development shattered their assumptions. During a series of pulses, observatories detected part of the returning lunar signal shifting away from Earth altogether, redirected into deep space. When mapped, the beam's trajectory pointed not randomly, but toward a cluster of stars long associated with ancient myths, the Pleiades. The moon was no longer merely answering, it was relaying, acting as a transmitter in a communication chain that bypassed Earth entirely. Humanity realized with a jolt of fear that it was not the primary audience of this dialogue. At best, we were bystanders. At worst, we were intruders overhearing a conversation that had never been meant for us. As Atlas and the moon exchanged signals, a new category of anomaly began to appear. Clocks in observatories reported minute but measurable discrepancies, seconds that seemed to vanish or repeat during the pulses. GPS systems faltered, satellites lost synchronization, and atomic clocks, long thought to be unshakable, began to drift in patterns matching the rhythm of Atlas's glow. These distortions weren't large enough to cause chaos, but they were undeniable. Time itself, the most fundamental constant of human life, was being bent ever so slightly in tandem with the cosmic dialogue. Some physicists proposed that Atlas's energy was warping local space-time, while others whispered darker theories, that time wasn't being distorted at all but rewritten, with fragments of our reality being overwritten in ways too subtle to notice. Then came the moment when the barrier between observer and participant finally collapsed. Across the globe, ordinary people reported hearing a low, resonant hum at the exact intervals of Atlas's pulses, without instruments, without headphones, with nothing but their own ears. In some cases, groups of people heard it simultaneously, describing it as a vibration that filled not the air, but their bones. Hospitals reported spikes in neurological activity, sudden seizures, and patients describing visions of geometric lights flashing across their closed eyelids. Linguists analyzing spontaneous drawings from those affected found uncanny resemblances to the same spiral symbols embedded in the lunar echoes. The moon was no longer just answering Atlas. It was amplifying the signal into humanity itself, bypassing machines, bypassing instruments, and resonating directly with the human mind. For the first time, the conversation wasn't happening above us. It was happening within us. For generations, we believed the moon was a silent witness, a pale and lifeless body circling Earth without purpose beyond its gravitational pull. But the events triggered by 3I Atlas have destroyed that illusion. What began as a pulse across space has become something far more profound, a revelation that the moon is not silent, not passive, and perhaps not even what we thought it was. The signals have shown that the moon is capable of listening, of answering, and even of relaying a message that bypasses humanity entirely. The tremors beneath its surface, the green glow across its face, the distortions of time, and the hum that now resonates inside human minds, all point to a terrifying truth. The moon has been waiting. Atlas was the key, the voice that awoke it. And once awakened, the moon did not speak to us. It spoke to something else, something beyond our world. Humanity has, perhaps for the first time, overheard a cosmic dialogue we were never meant to hear. The implications are staggering. If the moon is part of a greater system, then Earth itself may simply be a node in a network far older and far larger than we can comprehend. We are left with questions that chill the blood. Was the moon placed here as a sentinel, a transmitter, a bridge between worlds? Has Atlas returned not to visit us, but to activate it? And most of all, if the moon has answered, then who or what has been listening all along? One thing is now undeniable. The moon is no longer just ours. It has spoken, and its voice echoes in a conversation that stretches across time, space, and perhaps into realities we cannot yet imagine. Humanity is not in control of this dialogue. We are not the senders, and we are not the intended receivers. We are, at best, eavesdroppers on a transmission that may decide the future of our world.